my lovely friends, it's Margaret, and today's video is going to be one-part video essay, one-part rant, and all parts dragging Jason Rothenberg. Completely unscripted for this video. Usually, I mean, I'm usually unscripted, but usually I at least have some notes about what I want to say, and I didn't know how to articulate those on paper this time, so they're just floating around in my noggin, and hopefully they will all connect by the end of the video. But today I want to talk about how being able to shock your audience does not necessarily make you a good writer. Spoiler warning for those of you that have not been paying attention to anything on any media whatsoever, or just are in very specific niche parts of the internet, or not in niche parts in the case of the show that I'm mostly going to be talking about. But I am going to be spoiling Game of Thrones, The 100, and what is the name of the movie? Serenity, the Firefly movie, Serenity. I will be spoiling all of those in this video to make some of my point. This is not going to be a breakdown of what went wrong in season 7 of The 100. I don't know that that is going to happen on my channel just because I stopped watching after Bellamy died. After I found that out, I saw no reason to even try to catch up because the show that I had loved for 6 seasons was no longer recognizable to me. I don't know what happened with season 7, but it was a completely different show. It did not have any of the things that I came and started watching the show for. I don't know how they managed to botch this last season so bad. I would like to know some of the things that went on behind the decision making, but I'm not going to be getting into it. I'm not going to really be speculating. I'm also not going to be addressing the rumors regarding Bob and Jason's, supposedly there may have been a fallout. I'm not going to regard that because we don't have any proof, tangible proof that that is what happened. However, it's also, knowing Jason Rothenberg's record, not something I would put past him considering how he has treated Ricky Whittle. I will try not to rant too much about Bellark in this video because that's not the point of this video. But just know I am pissed about that on a fan level, but on a writer level, it does speak to a really disturbing trend that we are, not disturbing, but a really frustrating trend that I am seeing in many, many, many shows. Shows, books, movies, all kinds of stuff. And there's this idea that your audience should not see the big things coming. So for those of you that have not watched The 100, there was a major character death in the 13th or 14th episode. Bellamy dies. He gets shot by Clark, and I assume it was supposed to be this big shocking moment that's supposed to really hit the audience, and the reaction that I saw was mostly people being, number one, mad that Bellamy's death was done so quickly considering that he was such an important part of the show for 6 seasons, and number 2 being just frustrated by the fact that it goes back on all of the the entire season 7 just went back on all of his character growth from what I have seen. Again, I have not watched past episode 7 or 8, the first time he dies, which we knew he was not actually dead because there was no body. If there's no body, they're probably not dead, guys. That's just how it usually goes. But so he dies in that episode, and this is a show that has quite often used deaths for shock value, that has quite often mishandled death, made it more gory. And it's a gory, it is not a gory show, but it is a very violent show. It's very, very raw, and that's part of, I think, for some people, its appeal. That's something that kind of comes with consequences. However, I do think that, Bellamy's death was just completely and totally mishandled. There were good ways to have written that death. So I am mad that Bellamy died, but that's not my biggest problem with it as a writer. My biggest problem with it is that there were so many kind of big character deaths that were supposed to be big shocking moments, and none of them seem to have been set up properly, and none of them seem to have been earned by the story. You definitely could have earned Bellamy and Clark's death by the end of this season. I was very open at the beginning of the season about the fact that that's kind of what I expected. I expected to not be interested in the show once it was over. I was expecting for the cardinal writer sin to be committed in this series. So we just have this random moment where he dies, that throws out the entire relationship that he has built with Clark. There were so many other ways that they could have gotten out of that situation. It throws out all of the character growth that we see in him through 6 seasons. We've seen him grow. We know who he is, and so his actions in this season have not made sense, and there is no chance for him to redeem himself. And it's so poorly written, this turn of Bellamy converting to Cadigan's side doesn't make sense. They just threw out 6 seasons of work for most of these characters. It also reminds me of the setup and a lot of the things that they were building to Game of Thrones, especially in regards to Daenerys' character, where we've had this character that they have been building up to be this person that cares about the little person, which I can see where they were going with that. But this person that cares about, I'm not here to get into arguments about Game of Thrones, but this is another situation where, and it's not the only one on the show, but another situation where they made a change to a character's arc that ignored what the past seasons seemed to have been building towards, which was the fact that she was going to be a benevolent ruler, that she was going to correct a lot of the wrongs that had been done by her forebears. Whole thing to unpack there. Not gonna get into it. Just for the value of shocking the audience and giving them something that they were not expecting, we have this turn where she then goes and massacres all of these people, even though she has shown that that's not what she's about. She's not about hurting people who've had nothing to do with what she's fighting. There seems to be this idea in Hollywood and in TV shows, and sometimes with fiction writers, like novel writers, but I see that a lot less. I feel like you have more room with a novel, but there's this idea that if the audience can see what you're doing and can figure it out ahead of time, suddenly you have to change everything you've done because you can't give the audience anything that you expect. And that's not good writing, to just change things so that you can shock your audience. Now, I'm not saying a good writer is not going to shock their audience. A good writer will be able to do that, but they will also be able to do that with the foreshadowing that is necessary to make that moment mean something. Like I said, there were definitely ways that they could have written what happens with Bellamy in this season. There were ways they could have led up to Bellamy dying that would have fit with the theme of this show for the last 6 seasons. And yet we end up with this moment that basically, from what I've read, means nothing in the context of that season, and also goes back on decisions and points and lessons that were learned in other seasons, specifically season 4. And that's bad writing. I'm sorry. That is bad writing. If you have to do something that is out of character for your characters, something that goes against what happened in previous seasons, something that retcons what has happened, you're not doing a good twist. What you're doing is cheap shock value writing, and it's going to make your audience mad. Yes, it's going to shock them, but it is not a good reflection of you as a writer. In contrast, I want to bring up, if you haven't watched Serenity, tune off now. I'm still sad about this, but also it made sense in context. I'm not saying stories should not have consequences. I'm not saying character death is always a no-no, although in my book, if you kill off the main character, the love interest, you're done, you're dead to me. Goodbye. Bye. Hence the reason I'm no longer watching The 100. A death that I feel was shocking and also was earned is Wash's death at the end of Serenity. It showed the consequences of what they were doing in a way that made sense with the story, and it also shocks the audience because that is not what we are expecting. That's not what we're expecting in a way like we're not expecting to have this huge serious consequence because we haven't necessarily had them affect the main cast of the show. However, in the context of this movie, it serves a purpose. It is a shocking event. It surprises the audience. It shows the consequences and the fact that, oh wait, these characters very much might not make it to the end of this movie, which was something we probably needed. But it also leads into events and feeds into what happens later because it is part of the motivation for the characters later. I have not seen much about the rest of the 100. Most of what I read about the last episode really didn't. I was like, this doesn't even make sense to me just reading it. But from what I understand, the entire point of Clark killing Bellamy was so they wouldn't have to do something. Like I don't entirely understand the whole ascending, whatever is going on there, but the whole point was to keep Cadogan from winning or something like that. And then she just leaves the thing she didn't want him to give to Cadogan's people. And also, they end up doing exactly what Cadogan and his people were working to at the beginning. So, like, apparently Bellamy was right, but he still had to die. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? If you're going to have a character death that big, it has to mean something, and it has to be earned. Like, it has to make sense within the narrative. I could understand characters dying to show us there are consequences. That has been something that we have seen on this show again and again and again. We've seen characters die because of their own actions, because of the actions of others, because they were on the wrong side or the right side and trying to do the right thing and they had to be stopped. But that is not what happened here. They completely butchered this particular death, in my opinion. They did not handle it well. As rant aside, basically my point is that shocking your audience when you have done nothing to set up that moment, it's not a good look for a writer. It's not good writing. It's okay if your audience figures out what you're doing before you get there. You don't have to rewrite your entire book if they figure out the big twist that is going to happen. If you have done your job as a writer, if you have put in the foreshadowing, if you have set things up properly, then people are going to guess. Maybe not the entire audience, but people are going to be able to look at your writing and go, okay, this is a fictional story. I understand how fictional stories work. I understand foreshadowing and setup and all of this. And they're going to be able to guess some of these things. Yes, a good writer is going to be able to surprise their audience, but they're going to be able to do it in a way that is organic to the story. They're going to be able to do it in a way that does not require them to completely change any characters. They're going to do it in a way that does not require them to go back on anything that has happened in the story without maybe properly re-examining those things. There are times where you'll have something set up at the beginning of the story or at the beginning of the world, and you'll get further in the world and realize that no, in fact, the main character didn't necessarily, or the point of view character, our point of view, whoever was narrating the novel, didn't necessarily understand all of the complexities or the way that something works. Sometimes that does happen. Sometimes that can be the twist. But you have to have it set up properly. That's the main takeaway. Also, I just want to point out that the Bellarks were not crazy. We saw what they were writing because it was, in fact, what they were writing. And while I do have mixed feelings about Bob Morley recently, thank you, sir, for confirming it finally. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this random, ranty, weird video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Also, I will have other videos over here that you can check out. It will be other things that I do on my channel, obviously, because they're videos from my channel. Ignore me. Anyways, that is it for now, my friends. Happy writing, reading, ranting. Happy ranting, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!